early lah, why not? Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today. A big thank you, of course, to Kinokuniya Singapore for hosting us in your lovely space that I know all of us are very familiar with, as is pretty much any book lover in Singapore. My name is Chandreyee. I'm a writer and a culture journalist, and I'm here today with former Stegner Fellow and winner of the William Van Dyke Short Story Prize, Jemimah Wei. Round of applause. To celebrate and talk about her amazing debut novel, The Original Daughter, which, if I may say so, is truly one of the finest pieces of Singapore literature to have come out in many, many years. Jemimah, I'm so excited to get into it with you today, to talk about how you kind of arrived on the world literary stage with a story that's so uniquely Singaporean and yet has such undeniable global resonance. It's also been such an exciting time for you. You've been on an amazing book tour, you've been traveling everywhere, but back now in Singapore, talking to a home audience. How are you feeling?
I feel great. Honestly, I'm so happy to be home. I started writing this when I was in Singapore. I wrote a lot of it physically in Singapore because of COVID, so I came back, I was in quarantine, and I wrote a lot of it here. And even though I kicked off my book tour in the US, so this is my 7th or 8th week of straight touring, it's just not the same when you come home. It's great to be home with this book, with people for whom this book I think means something very special and very different. And I'm very excited to get into it with you as well. Thanks everyone for coming. This is great.
Okay, so just before we begin proper, a couple of quick announcements. We will be having a Q&A at the end of the session, and I know that sometimes as Singaporeans we're a little bit pricey to raise our hands, so we've incentivized you. We have 3 really lovely custom designed book pouches up for grabs. So if you're amongst the first 3 questions, you will walk away with one. After the Q&A, we will also have a book signing with Jemimah, so if anyone would like to meet her and have her endorse your physical copies of The Original Daughter, that will be your opportunity to do so. So let us begin. I would like to rewind the clock a little bit and go back to the very start of this journey. I know that The Original Daughter is a book that took a decade, 10 years to complete, which is, just an incredible amount of time to dedicate to anything. So take us back to the start. How did the idea for the novel first come to you, and how did it kind of evolve and develop along the way?
So I started writing, I think the first words of this novel in 2014, and if I had known it was going to take 10 years, I would have felt very different about it. When you start, you think to yourself, oh, I start writing this story, maybe I'll finish in a year or two, and then 10 years later, here we are. So every time somebody asks me how I get started with this book, where the idea came from, I give them a different answer every single time. Because I feel like this is one novel which started off as maybe 50 different entry points. But one of the ways I came to this novel was that in about 2014, right, when I started writing it, there was this global shift towards a sense of, like boundaries and wellness and self-care. And I was really interested in the not marketing speak of that, right? Not just like, oh, this is what a good life looks like lived well, but what does it look like to truly invest in the relationships that we have? What does it mean like to have chosen family and to keep choosing your chosen family even when love is difficult? And so that was one of the entry points in this novel. And the way it took form was I was really interested in this idea of a returned sibling, like a family member that's either given away or taken in, and what that would look like. And so that's, the 2 big veins that kind of like got braided into this novel.
And one of the things that I love most about the book is that it's full of unmistakably Singaporean details and nuances. And I love that you don't over-explain them. So, we talked about the void deck, for example. The void deck is such a key site in the book, and never once do you explain what a void deck is, which to a non-Singaporean reader, maybe they're like, what is a void deck, So tell us a bit about why was it important to you to let these Singaporean references speak for themselves?
Right. So about void deck, right? The answer is in the name. You hear the words void deck, you're like, what do you think it is? It's a void deck. It's a deck that's void. You can hang out in it, But, on a craft level, you think to yourself when you read a character who wakes up thinking, oh, look at me, woken up in a Singaporean morning as a Singaporean, walking down my Singaporean streets, eating my Singaporean breakfast, it feels so inauthentic to the way a person lives. Like a fish doesn't think about the water they live in. And so, as a writer, your first and primary responsibility is creating a lived reality that is real for these characters. And so I could explain and then betray the characters, or I could not and just trust the reader. Because we grew up in Singapore, we read books set in America or wherever. They play baseball and you're like, cool, that seems like a fun thing to do, I don't know. Or you read a book where people like ride on a dragon and you're like, that seems realistic. So I just believe that somebody, wherever they grow up, can read a book being like, void that, cool, I'll make that leap. And I think part of being a writer is like really trusting your audience and then just like knowing that they will meet you where you're at if you do the story enough justice. Yeah.
I think that's such a kind of wonderful way to approach writing a local story for a global audience, right? Because we've talked a lot about who are you writing the story for? Who is your imagined audience? And one of the things you told me is that even if the entire world loved it, if you felt like a Singaporean audience couldn't relate to it, or if they didn't feel like it was, authentic, it would kill you.
I definitely think, and I talked to so many of my Singaporean and Malaysian author friends in the States about this, the homegrown audience is really important to us because like so much of publishing, you think to yourself, you're trying to keep the external voices outside of your head for as long as possible. And you really want to keep this authentic to the people that you are writing this for, right? So my first reader is my husband and one of my girlfriends, Xiao T, who's maybe somewhere, but they've read everything I've ever written. It would be the most irritating thing for me in the world if everybody else got it and they did not. And so that is one thing I was thinking about very closely as I was working on this book. Yeah. And people keep asking me, what is it like to write a book for a global audience? What is it like to write a book for a global audience? But truth be told, this book took 10 years to write. I did not think I would even finish writing this book. Writing is hard and it's lonely. So for the longest time, I just didn't think, what about an audience? I just thought, gosh, I hope I can finish writing this book. And then only when I finished it, I was like, all right, now I guess questions of audience come in. But that really is a much later consideration, I think, for me at least.
For the early part, it's just if it gets to an audience, whatever that looks like, good enough.
Yeah, you think to yourself, I hope I like this book that I write. I hope I can finish writing this book that I've started writing. And around the 5-year mark, you're like, I don't know. I just hope I can finish a book.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing we've also discussed is in the Western kind of literary tradition and publishing scene, there is a tendency towards absolutism, especially when it comes to books about other cultures, right? So for example, you might be searching for this one great Singapore novel that completely distills and sums up the Singaporean experience. Of course, we know as Singaporeans that that's not possible. So with your book, what was the unique and particular slice of Singapore that you wanted to capture?
I think that one of the things I was really keen on capturing was this sense of girlhood and the intimacy of just being so close to somebody you're not romantically entangled with. I just feel like growing up in all TV and media, you get all these stories of romance, right, that are kind of prioritized in the hierarchy of romance. But as a girl growing up in Singapore, that was not the reality of my lived experience. Most of my extremely intimate, extremely close relationships were non-romantic relationships. They were with like family members, mentors, friends, sisters, just like people I grew up with. And when a romantic interest comes in, that tends to be a little later and also tends to be a little temporary, right? I mean, I don't know if people marry somebody they're interested in at 12 years old. I did not. But so even when a romantic partner comes in and is very important to you, that to me is like a sign of somebody entering the same shelf of intimacy and importance. And growing up, I remember feeling very strongly I did not love the fact that in all media there is this prioritization of romantic relationships. So I knew my debut would be very interested in focusing on that like thread of intimacy that is outside of romance. Yeah.
This is a personal kind of side note, but as you were talking about that unique intimacy of girlhood and just kind of that friendship that Arin and Jen have as well, it reminds me of my childhood best friend, who is still my best friend today. When we first got into our first kind of romantic relationships, we had a breakup. Like, we had to break up within ourselves because we were like, I need to now not think of you as the only one most important person in my life.
Yeah. But that's so interesting because we don't talk. I mean, I think in recent years, I think there was a New York Times article about like what a friendship breakup means and how a friendship breakup is often so much worse than a romantic breakup because we don't have the parameters, we don't have the roadmaps to learn how to deal with this. Emotionally, you just think to yourself, oh, okay, there is like a chronology of life. You go from being by yourself to being with friends, and then you get married, and then maybe that becomes your primary relationship. And I just think that's such a limiting way to live. Life can be plural. Life can be full of love if you let it in. and that love can be complicated too. And so, yeah, like what you're talking about, I thought that one of the big things I was working with this book was the idea of love and what it can endure. And so, unfortunately, the girls in this book have their relationship really pressurized and interrogated, because that's the benefit of fiction, right? You can play those things out in a fictional reality. And yeah, it just like really made me think to myself, what choices do we have in our day-to-day life? What kind of attention do we pay to the relationships in our life? Yeah.
And speaking of, the pressures that their relationships went through, Arin, Jen, and the other characters in the book, I will say, I'm sure the audience agrees with me here. These characters have stayed with me. Like, I walk around still, I think about Arin, I feel repressed anger, rage, grief towards them.
Wait, for Arin or against Arin?
Towards.
Towards
both
Arin?
of them.
Okay.
We get into this later because I think it reflects, who you relate to more reflects something about you.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm ready to share that with the big audience right now. But yeah, your characters are just exceptional. The way you flesh them out, they're so three-dimensional, they are so raw. I would love to know a little bit about your characterization process. What did you draw from? How did you construct these amazing characters?
So interestingly, this book, for those of you who haven't read it, it's a first-person narrator, and it's from this girl called Jen, and we only see in her perspective. But this was a craft decision that was made, I want to say, a couple of years into writing it. It was a third-person narrative for a long time, and I moved it over to first for various reasons, including that her character is more interesting to inhabit for a reader because she's more frustrating, like she makes more frustrating choices. But when I was in third person and because of that, I approached the novel almost like a flat ground where all the characters are equal to me and then one becomes a narrator. But I think of narrators and protagonists as two different things. So I did a lot of writing into every single character. Like, I don't think there was a single character in there that I don't have at least like 20 notebooks full of. And a lot of that was like, okay, what do you think they would think about this? What do you think they would think about that? I did a lot of work in the grandparents' generation, even though they don't make it into very much of the book. I did a lot of work in like the side characters like Penelope and all of that, like like the friend in school. And I just really needed to understand exactly what they think about the same situation, so that when incident A happens, for example, I know how 5 different people are reacting to it differently and how they would see the other person and what they would assume about the other person. So all that to say, it was like a really inefficient process because it took so long and I spent so many years really just getting into each character, some of which don't even make it onto the page. So that's one of my very isolated processes. But the other one is I just really just talk about these characters. I would just follow my husband around the house being, so by the way, there is this character's doing something now, what do you think? And then he'll be like, oh, I'm trying to cook actually. And then I have a filmmaker friend who I would talk to about story, about character. And then one of the more drastic things I did was when I moved to the States in 2019, I got insurance and I was like, oh cool, first time getting corporate insurance from my school. So what that means is you can get therapy for $25 instead of $200. Ooh. So then I went to a therapist and treated her like my tuition teacher for fiction. I said, hi, so here is the setup of characters that I have, and this character is doing something really frustrating and I really want to know why she would do that. So then this therapist was like, okay, yeah, do you have anything you want to talk about your life? I said, not yet. Because I would never in my life again get to pay $25 per session for therapy. So I really want to know what the birth order changes about this or that, or what this character who's super really rich and famous might think about this. Why would a mother do this? Why would that grandmother do this? And I think for a while she was like, this is weird. And then she kind of got with it. She was like, this is fun. This is interesting. This is a fun session. I look forward to our sessions every week and I thought, oh yeah, I got A+ in therapy. So yeah, I remember I brought that up at my launch event in New York and people thought it was crazy. But then after the writers came up to me and they were like, how have you not ever thought about exploiting therapy? So,
it's so dangerous to be a writer, right? Imagine you have therapy, you're meant to get there and go there and kind of solve your issues, but you're giving your characters therapy instead, and that's just a normal thing that we have to accept.
Yeah, so one thing that I also did was, because I was trying to teach myself how to write a novel, I would go and just approach writers and be like, how did you write your novel? And then I would just sign up for classes trying to teach myself things about interiority. So I took this class with Kirsten Balders-Quaid, who wrote The 5 Woods, amazing book. And she said that one writing exercise she does is to give her characters therapy. So you sit down with a character and you tell yourself, okay, so now I'm going to treat myself as a therapist, and Jen maybe, or Arin as my client, and I'm just going to keep pushing for answers and see what the characters respond as. It's a really good exercise. And I was like, wow, I feel like I got ahead of the curve because I started doing that in real life with a therapist. Yeah.
Okay, I think this is a good time to maybe do a little bit of a reading.
Okay.
As we are talking about, the relationships between the characters, we're going to flip to one of my favorite parts in the book, and it is when the girls. Should I not? I think I don't say lah. I don't say the plot.
I don't know what you're going to tell me.
No, I'm asking you to read the void deck.
The scene.
Photocopy.
The scene.
Yeah.
Okay.
The scene.
Yeah,
one of
the
my
scene.
favorite scenes.
Okay.
No
sure.
context.
No
for anyone who
context.
hasn't read it yet. Yeah.
Okay, a little bit of context is the two girls are at this age, teenagers. I think they're like 14 and 15, and the mother is now got a new job in one of the photocopy shop in the void deck. Okay, yeah. So she works at a photocopy shop. She has a boss who is a photocopy auntie. Yeah. So your mother, she proclaimed to Arin and me one day, was wasting all her time trying to teach. She's a natural businesswoman. The photocopy auntie spoke so loudly and with such sincere admiration that the other void deck aunties nodded and my mother blushed a girlish pink. It struck me deeply. I became convinced that the pathway to happiness lay in proving conclusively to the rest of the neighborhood that despite her change in fortunes, Sue Young was perfect in every way. After that, Arin and I started stopping at the photocopy shop on our daily walks home from school, presenting ourselves for examination as if we were two glimmering fragments of my mother's character. It worked. Before long, the void deck aunties began perking up like wilted sunflowers whenever we approached, beaming fondly at the sight of Arin pulling out a bottle of cold water, freshly filled from the school's dispensers to quench my mother's thirst, gratified by my polite greetings. By the way, I attentively asked after the photocopy auntie's recovering sprained ankle, asked whether the bakery auntie's daughter had passed a driving test, commiserated about how pretty the new girlfriend of the mee pok seller's son was, and speculated whether this would be the woman who would finally ascend to being the neighborhood's mee pok princess, worthy of their secret vinegar recipe. I could see each auntie filing away these examples and incorporating them into the gossip and nagging they carried home. Sue's girls are so courteous, so thoughtful, so filial. Why not you? Why not you? We were such fixtures at the shop that one afternoon, a regular customer automatically handed Arin a slim book with multiple post-its marking which pages were to be copied. My mother started, intercepted the woman, then glanced at the clock. Weren't our exams approaching? Was this really the time to waste mooning around in the company of these women, hanging on to their every word? She laughed and chased us off. Get on, go home, return to your revision. It was an idea that charmed the void deck aunties, that they posed a trawl equal to that of study of books. We left them tittering, and as we traced our way back home, balancing single file on the curb alongside the roadside bushes, Arin and I exchanged intelligence. The minimart uncle's wife is suffering from sunstroke. The bakery auntie's husband is gambling again. The alteration auntie accidentally damaged some lady's leather pants. She had to compensate her $200. Arin made a face, poor thing. Asked her about it again in a week. I plucked a bloom from an ixora bush, pinching the thin stem and pulling lightly, and then turned. Arin already had an ixora stem laid out on her tongue like a bee's sting, waiting. We savored the drop of nectar, our tiny spalls, and then tossed the flowers to the ground. Put it in the binder when we get home, I said. A dossier on the neighborhood aunties containing all the facts of their lives, their idiosyncrasies and tics and triggers, and weak, easily flattered spots, was by that time thick as a fist. Arin nodded and reached for another flower.
That is truly one of my favorite sections of the book, I think, because it's so funny. You see this really two intelligent young girls navigating the world of this void deck photocopy shop and the way they're trading gossip for currency. They're really young at this point. It's so funny, but also it kind of captures that unique experience as a young girl where your mom is really the center of your world. And you're slowly starting to see her as more of a three-dimensional human being and not this omniscient God who controls everything in your life, right? And it kind of makes you love her more because you start seeing her as human. I just think it captures that sentiment so beautifully. And in that section, we also kind of start to see the Singapore education system emerge as a main character in your book, which it very much is. And you do a wonderful job of capturing its all-encompassing intensity and mind-numbing anxiety that it can cause. How did you approach writing about studying? And did it come from personal experience?
Well, so if anybody in the audience has not personally felt victimized by the Singapore education system, you can raise your hand. But generally, when I started writing a book about growing up in Singapore, it would feel so untrue to not have that layer of stress in it. I just feel like it would then just be a version of Singapore that would be magical realism. Because everyone I know is so stressed out. When I was writing this book, I thought maybe things have changed. So I went down a bunch of Reddit holes, like Reddit/Singapore, and there are all these kids in it who are just like, I'm just like trying to survive. I'm trying. Please give me a study key to, like teach me some hacks to like make it through the day. And I just, I don't know. Like I don't have an answer for what is a better way to live, because I know that there are reasons why our system is set up this way. But I think as an artist, what I can do is say, hey, it's real, I've reflected it, this lived reality is accurate, and it's immortalized in fiction. Because I think one of the more irritating things about being a young person is that everybody around you tells you, it's okay, it's a phase, you get over it, which is like, it's a stepping stone to something better. This education system, this like suffering you're going through right now, it's okay because it will be worth it. But just because something will be worth it doesn't mean it doesn't actually suck to go through it. Like it's just like the most irritating thing for somebody who still has to live the 24 hours of mind-numbing stress and suffering. And to me, it was important to have that in literature, so that, because we do live in a society where a lot of things are seen based on what they're worth in the future. Like we look at something and we think, okay, this is the value I'm going to get for it. But there is value in just looking at the daily, day-to-day living as well. And so that was like a long-winded answer to like why I had so much of studying written in it. And then on the craft level, I think what I really struggled with was that, studying is hard for the person going through it. It's boring for everybody else looking at it, because you're just waking up and then going to school and then like crying and taking a shit for 5 minutes and coming back studying some more and then studying until late at night. And then for a character, for a reader to watch that, they're like, this is kind of boring actually. Like the character's just sitting at her desk again. So then the craft challenge was how to make that interior lives rich enough and varied enough so that it's not just struggling. There are also moments of joy in it, because I think to say that the entire of schooling education is stress is also a way of flattening the experience, of dehumanizing it, because there are many beautiful moments. And I think one of the reasons I set this book in Bedok, even though I don't live there, is I went to school in the area and I have great affection for Bedok. And my growing up years, I just had so much fun just doing dumb stuff with my friends, even though I was stressed out all the time. So I wanted to have that full range captured in literature. Yeah.
Yeah, Bedok is such a kind of unique and beautiful part of Singapore. I mean, Easties,
Side by side, yeah.
Absolutely.
There's a nervous murmur. I feel like there's a silence.
I feel like we're in a hostile crowd when not a lot of people are from the East, but it's okay. I do want to ask about another key theme in the book, which is class consciousness. And that's something that comes up very early. You start seeing these young girls becoming increasingly conscious of where they sit in the class brackets in society. And I think it's such an interesting theme for you to explore in depth through the eyes of two girls who start off kind of in the same place, but then their paths completely diverge, right? So why was this an important theme for you to address in the book?
So I think Singapore's interesting. You grow up hearing, and you hear this all over the world, but specifically I think in Singapore, in the schooling system, you hear to yourself, if you work hard enough, things will change, right? And then I think in the recent decade, maybe people have started to feel like maybe it's not true. But in older countries that have hundreds of years of history, they can see models of how this might or might not be true. But Singapore's a young country. We do have that sense of, things could go anywhere. It is the potential for things to be different, to not follow the roadmap of a different older Western country is there. And so when I was growing up, right, I was growing up in one type of background, and then very quickly the internet came about. There were all these sudden chances for globalization and making money in different ways. And I was very interested in that. I was so interested in what it would mean to then take control of your own destiny in a rapidly modernizing age. And this why this book is set in the very specific window before the internet got bad. At the start, the internet was fun, and you were like, oh, you're really interested in shoelaces. Somebody on Tumblr in Wisconsin's gonna be like, I love shoelaces, and then you can make a community outside of your immediate reality. And I thought that was so interesting to capture in fiction. I've always been interested in that. Before I knew that being a writer was a realistic possibility, I thought I would do my PhD on what social media and the internet meant for our consciousness in terms of managing class and managing opportunity globally. And then I realized you could just do fiction instead. Then I did that.
I have to say, I'm glad you went the literary route.
Yeah, me too.
I want to talk about the ending, and I'm going to try to keep this spoiler free for anyone who hasn't gotten to that part yet. Anyone who has finished the book, I think you'll agree, the ending wrecked me. Like, I read it late at night, 3 a.m., had a brief panic attack, sobbed myself to sleep. You know, it's just the experience of reading the ending of this book. It's so visceral and so beautifully done. I want to know, you know, given that the book first took root in your mind 10 years ago, did you always plan for the ending to go the way it did?
No. In fact, the ending was, I think, the hardest part for me to get right. Because even when I was, like, when I say like 2020, I remember very vividly because I almost gave up writing in 2020 because of COVID. I just like really struggled to finish this book. And I hit like a major writing block, and I was just following writers around in New York, being like, "Hi, you're a writer, you wrote a book, I like it. Can I ask you about like what it's like to not know how the book is gonna end?" And every writer gave me the same answer, which is you just have to keep going. There is no way you can Wikipedia the ending to your own book. You just need to figure it out. And so at that point, I remember, because it was right before COVID hit, I remember thinking to myself at 2020, I still don't know how this book is gonna end. I still don't. And you know, I think I only found it in middle of 2021 maybe, when I was like having like an intense writing burst. And even then, it took a long time to tweak the ending. It actually ended, well, I guess I'm trying to figure out how to do this without like giving anything major away. But it actually ended like, I want to say a paragraph before the actual ending. This new ending is like new. I think it actually ended here. Yeah, okay, so this is very annoying for everybody else, right? Okay, so when you read it, you can think to yourself, it actually ended with the word "who knows." So if you know, you know. If you don't know, then read the book and buy it, I guess. But I think because like I was really determined as an... Okay, so let me rephrase. As an artist, you think to yourself, how can I be true to these characters? And that meant that things were going to go a certain way. But as an artist who is not just the artist the writer of this book, you think to yourself, what is the world I want to see reflected? And I think my ethos as a person is I do really feel like there are avenues towards coming together again. I am like a hopeful person, and I think as an artist you must be hopeful, otherwise what are you doing? Like the world is depressing enough. And so that's how I feel right now. I mean, that might change. But so I really was very determined to get it to that point, or at least to a point that would meet the intersection of feeling authentic to what the characters would do, yet not be like massively depressing. And so I think even right up to the very last edits with my editor, like I had already submitted my final edits to my US editor, and my UK editor came back and was like, we were still going back and forth on a specific word in the ending, and that ending was really like the hardest to get right. And you know, I'm kind of glad that people feel strongly about it. I do think that my friend Arin was telling me that having a book is like giving birth, you know, like you are so traumatized by the process of doing it that you immediately forget once you've done it what it's like, and then you're like, let's do it again. and I do feel that way now, because now when people tell me about the ending, I'm just like, I think it's fine. Like, you felt strongly about it. I feel like it's just, you know, books end, that's okay. And then I look at my journals and I was like, oh no, it was terrible for me too when I was writing it actually. Yeah.
Yeah, it was not fine.
Okay, sorry.
You talked a little bit about it. Maybe this will be my last question before we open it up to the floor. You talked about trying to be positive as an artist because you have to in the depressing world that we're living in. So I will ask you about kind of the state of the world. Zoom out a little bit from the book. And, you know, we are living in uniquely difficult and troubling times. As a writer, what meaning are you finding in fiction and your craft right now? And what role do you really think that writers and artists can play in this moment?
Okay, so on the local level, on the day-to-day level, writing is a job. I get up and just do it every day for like from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. I mean, now I'm touring, so I'm not doing that. That would be crazy. But on the day-to-day, that's what I do. And so actually, whatever happens with the world, my job is still to show up at the desk every day. I don't think writers get a specific, or artists get a specific pass to be like, oh, I've got so many feelings about it, I'm not going to go to work. We still have to do it. But then, on a more meta level, you know, I feel like my job is just to ask questions and to reflect as accurately as possible the reality of how I see the world, and how everybody sees the world is slightly different, slightly inflected. And so that's just my job. My job is not really to provide answers. I don't think I can, like that would be assuming an authority that I don't have. And I don't know, I really go back and forth on this because I'm a debut, obviously. My relationship to writing is a specific way, and I know it will change over the next 10 years. But every time a reader comes up to me and tells me what this book meant to them or how it's changed the way they've seen something, it kind of expands my view of what art can do in a way that I didn't realize it could before. So I think this is like a non-answer almost, because it's like I feel that my job is to ask the questions and then to be very serious and as serious as I can about answering those questions in a way that isn't frivolous or surface level. Yeah.
I don't think it's a non-answer at all. I think it's a great answer because sometimes it can be very overwhelming, right? To think about the big issues that we're kind of facing and your place in the world in relation to them. But I think that is a great way to think about it. On that note, I will open it up to the floor. So please, raise your hands if you have any questions for Jemimah, and I'll come to you. Okay, we have one right there.
Actually, the ending feels kind of open-ended. So what does it actually mean for Genevieve?
Okay, yeah, so the question is the ending feels open-ended, so what does it mean for Genevieve? I think that's great because I believe in the writer is dead theory, which is once I've finished writing the book, it's like up to you to tell me what you think. So I had a reader actually write me a bunch of fan fiction about the book, where Genevieve became like the queen of an ice cream empire, and I was like, great, I love that for you, honestly. So I have my own theories about what it means for them, but I will say one thing about it, which y'all can take as you will, which is there was a very specific decision made to end the book before the girls turned 30, and I think that's because your life can keep changing. And so whatever feels like a circumstance that feels inescapable is not actually inescapable. Things can change, life keeps changing, your circumstances keep changing, and the way you view your choices and your agency will evolve as time goes on. And so I think that is like one very specific decision I made. But that's just my opinion. Like people who read it might feel differently. They might feel that she's gone off to like a different ice cream empire or something.
Any other?
You get a pouch.
Yes.
Because you're the first person. Yay! Okay.
Anyone else would like to ask a question? If not, I'm happy to. Oh, okay, we do have more questions.
Hi, Jemimah, I've been a long time fan, so it's a bit weird. I'm not a stalker or anything, but I feel like a lot of the experiences you wrote about in the book are kind of inspired by your own personal journey. For example, a little part where they go overseas for a bit, I feel like I saw a little bit of that when I was reading your Broke to the Exchange series. So yeah, is there any other interesting incidents in your life that you felt went into this book? Yeah.
Okay, so the question is, this is somebody who's a long-time fan but not a stalker, and would like to ask if there are any like real-life experiences that fed into the book. So I think the thing about fiction, right, is that it would be like really bad for fiction to do a one-to. Like, reality is very restraining for fiction actually, because it doesn't allow things to go in like the direction a character would take it. But I was very specific about wanting to put in things from the life that I know. So like, for example, the shops that I love, I would put them in. Or like specifically, I named certain places after like friends and family. Like I really wanted to have that in. I'm trying to think about like if there's anything specific that happened in real life that I would put in. I think there is maybe one thing that I think came up in conversations with my editor, because everybody will ask the same thing, right? Oh, how much of this is your personal life? And I was like, not very much. But when I was in school, I had a teacher tell me that you should drop out. You were like, not everybody is meant for school, actually. Maybe you've been there. I feel like so many people have. And so I had forgotten all about this. This teacher who was like, not everyone's meant for school. And I was like, you're wrong, I am. Like, I work hard. And he was like, I don't think so. And I was like, okay, that's like really discouraging actually. And then I forgot all about it until I was in conversation with my editor, and then this like random memory that popped up in my head, and I was like, that's my villain origin story. And I was like, oh, this is gonna be great on book tour. I'm gonna love this story.
I hope you're watching, whoever you are.
Okay, so again, I will caveat that by saying I feel like we had a very different type of education system back then where, I don't know, I'm not a teacher, right? And so I don't know what it's like right now, but I do think that there was this idea last time that, you could guilt a student into like working hard. And it was like, So I am pretty ADHD, which is something I only was diagnosed with as an adult. And so being a school in secondary school with like traditional school instructors was really hard for me. And I did well in school the whole way because I would just suffer. You know, I'll be like, I need to perform or die. And so, but it was not healthy, you know? And so I do think that now we are moving more towards like more awareness on what it's like to have different kinds of learning styles. But back then, I can understand like an older person being like, well, I need to just like discipline you or like shame you into trying to do well, not realizing that somebody might be just trying to do their best already, and it just
You have internalized shame already, probably some.
I had bad memory too, so the shame went away. I forgot.
Okay.
And you also get a book pouch.
Yeah.
Oh, you got one? Okay, great. Oh, no problem.
So I just finished reading the book about an hour ago.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I was really blown away. I agree that it's one of the most masterful pieces of fiction I've read in the past decade. One of the questions is, one thing that struck me is how lyrical the English is, and I noticed that carries into the speech of the characters as well. But I presume that was an intentional choice to not incorporate like English or just keep that lyrical tone throughout the book. I think what the thought process was in terms of English and speech.
Okay, so the question, this is a reader who just finished about 1 hour ago, which is amazing, and was talking about the lyricism of the writing and how Singlish doesn't make it into spoken dialogue. So actually there is some Singlish in the spoken dialogue, they are spoken by the older generation, and the decision to not incorporate Singlish at the time was because I was thinking about these characters as two girls who are really trying to reinvent themselves for a global audience, and part of that was like sanitizing your language, trying to speak in a certain way or like adopt certain syntax that didn't feel as local to make yourself more attractive to a global audience. So in different ways, these two characters, well, these two main characters, but also the other like friends in the book, are all thinking of themselves with the idea of like a global eye looking at them. One character becomes like a global like actress, like that's not a spoiler, it's in the opening pages, and the other one is thinking very specifically in one scene about what it would mean to apply for a job overseas, and what does being Singaporean mean, what advantages does our passport give us, does, you know, what is the impression, the narrative of Singaporean abroad, and how do we play into that and use that to our advantage. So that was part of the consideration. Like I think a lot of that, it's not like super forefront in the book, but I do think that there is a narrative of what a Singaporean means globally, and managing our relationship to that is like an ongoing thing. Yeah. Thank you.
That is our last book pouch, but please still ask questions.
I want some more questions. I love talking about this book. It took so long to write it.
Yes, we have a question right here.
So yeah, I'm actually the same age as Jen. So why have Jen and Arin at this particular, born in those particular years?
Oh, okay. The question is, you are the same age as the narrator, and you're wondering about why they were born in that specific year. So this is a very unfortunately mathematical question, which is there is a specific geographical event in the book that is a real event that did happen in the real world, and so I had to just count backwards. I was like, okay, how long will it take to get to that event? Because when I started writing this book, right, the book changed greatly over the course of the 10 years, but the big story beats I always knew were going to be there. Like I knew what was going to happen, and so because I had written it in my head as like this like story, and then later it developed into a novel. And so because of the event, I just had to work backwards. I was like, okay, here are some of the global things that happen that need to happen when they are at that age, and then so minusing JC, minus 4 years of secondary school, minus how many years then they will have to be this age at this time, and then minusing even more backwards, because I'm thinking to myself, when would the grandparents have to move into this house? Because you know, as Singapore like history, HDB is like a more recent thing in grandparents' generation. So then I had to then count. Yeah, and then that's like not a very interesting answer, but unfortunately in authorship you do a lot of math, and nobody tells you about having to do all this math. So at some point I was just writing down all the characters' ages, what happened in the world during those years, and how do those events like affect the characters' decisions and vice versa. Yeah.
Maybe I'm going to steal a bit of time and add to that a little bit. And so you mentioned a couple of factors for why the book was set in that specific era, right? So there's the historical event that you had to accommodate, and then there was pre-bad internet, on the cusp of good internet, that was one factor as well. But do you think if those issues were not there, would you have been able to transplant this story into a more modern day setting, or do you think it needed to kind of be in that era?
You know, unfortunately, when I started writing it, it was a modern day setting. I just took so long that now people are like, oh, historical fiction. In my head, it's always been super contemporary. So unfortunately, like, you know, that's what happens when you take a long time. So don't chase trends if you're going to be a writer, because it takes a long time to write, even longer time to publish. But yeah, I don't know. I just, you know, one thing that was really interesting to me was this idea of how we felt so optimistic when social media hit, and then how that very quickly changed into just a different kind of cage. So unfortunately now, if you know the book starts now, you will already have that information available, and so the character psychology would not evolve in that way. Yeah.
I think we have time for one or two more questions. Okay, we've one over there.
Hello.
Given that you sort of follow in Tash's footsteps but in Singapore now, do you have a sense of how that has impacted other local writers looking to go international? Any words for maybe budding writers?
Okay, so the question is, given that I followed in the footsteps of my mentor Tash, also amazing Malaysian writer, how do I feel about other writers maybe going international, like emerging writers going international? So I think I don't know how younger writers would feel, and I think really what I was trying to do by being so public. Okay, so let me take a few steps back. I will say that I've been pretty public about my life my whole life. You know, I'm very open in sharing my life. But as a writer, you become more and more private. I do feel that intense need to just like be quieter, not like volume-wise, but just like in terms of, you know, like more privacy, you know. And one of the big reasons I resisted that is I think I have a responsibility actually to share so that younger writers can see one option of what is possible, right? Because I remember growing up before meeting Tash, who, you know, was the first writer I met in flesh and blood, who was making a career of being a writer professionally for many years. Before that, I just thought to myself, being a writer is like something you do by yourself. And so I would, if I wanted to write a book, I would have to like get a different kind of job, which I did, and then like write on the side. And then meeting Tash really fundamentally shifted my literary consciousness, thinking, okay, it is possible actually. It's not necessarily plausible because it's hard, and you know, but it's possible. Before that, like every example I saw just was not anybody who looked like me or from our like region, right? And then so just thinking about it, I just think to myself, you know, I had a choice when I sold my book to not announce it. This is something okay, how many of you here want to be writers? So okay, cool, great, nice, good job, brava, born courage. One of the things that you don't realize is that you have a lot of choice about what you decide to share. So when you start your book, you can announce if you want to that you've signed with an agent, that you've sold the book, like who you sell it to. You can choose to not publicize any of that information, and there was that temptation for me to do that, right? Because then I'm just like, oh, it's my own business, it's nobody's business. But I remember what it meant for me to read that other Singaporean writers was doing it. Not just Tash, my friend Rachel Hing. Like I remember when I read her book, I was just so amazed that this could happen. And you know, it's just Amanda Lee Cole, you know, like just knowing that this can exist just made things different for me in what I conceive as my realm of possibility. And so I can't say, you know, what it means to younger writers because only they can answer that. But I can say what I'm hoping to do, which is to just show one possibility. Yeah.
And I think, Jemimah, you're great at practical advice. Like, this is something I've experienced with you. So on that note, could you share maybe one simple piece of advice for Singaporean writers who are, you know, dreaming about building a literary life?
Make friends. Yeah, like I think writing is lonely. Even if you are born and raised in an environment that is part of the global publishing majority, it's still very lonely. And even more so, you know, being from like a country or setting outside of that majority. So at many points, it can feel like Schrodinger's project, right? Because most writers won't tell people they're writers. And so if you just stop writing, nobody knows. And the project that never was can be the project that never is. And so having artists around you, people who are aspiring to the same things, people who believe in what you're doing, confirms the artistic reality back to you in a way that's immensely, immensely important, I think. Yeah. And then a more pragmatic piece of advice is if you're writing novels specifically, you should lift weights because you sit at a desk for a really long time, it's very bad for your back. Yeah.
See, I told you, practical advice. I think we have time for one more audience question. Yes, one at the back.
Could we have a sneak peek at your plans for the next book?
Oh, okay. The question is, do we have a sneak peek at my plans for the next book? One thing people don't realize is from point of sale to publishing is 2 years. So I sold this book 2 years ago, and now it's out. I sold it in 2023, and now it's 2025. So in the interim, I tried to write something new, and I just don't know if it's gonna catch. Yeah. So
the answer is go sneak peek, or?
Well, okay.
Give us like a little hint of what you're hoping to explore.
Okay, I'm hoping to explore something that currently is very contemporary in Singapore, and hopefully it will still be contemporary when it comes out.
I'm gonna be thinking about this all day. Thank you so much, everyone, for all your wonderful questions and for being here with us today. We are going to start the book signing shortly. I believe we are going to do a selfie before that. Someone told me we have a selfie schedule.
Hi, okay, all turn around and face here. And even those that are like nearer to the so that everybody.
I'm just sweating over business. Oh, wait.
Anyone who has your copy of the original data, please hold it up for the camera.
Thank you for coming, everyone. I will sign and endorse your books if you want to purchase one, but please purchase it before you come here.
Yes, so please bring your purchased physical copies of the original data to the front, and you'll be able to meet Jemimah and have her endorse your copy.